Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. It is supposed to be Poetry Thursday, but I just finished reading something that I wanted to get out of the way so I could start focusing on my reading challenge for this month, my anniversary booktube reading challenge that I have going on with the Bits of Lit. So I'll read something, or I'll talk about something that I read instead. I'll probably get back to Poetry Thursday soon, I promise. I keep putting it off. But I guess the only person I'm really hurting is myself here. But yeah, so without further ado, let's talk about a graphic novel that I read. It is about children imprisoned under life sentences and vigilante superheroes. I am referring to Batman, the Knightfall Saga. This is volume 1 of the saga, by Doug Mensch, Chuck Dixon, Alan Grant, and art by Jim Aparo, Norm Brayfogle, Graham Nolan, and a bunch of other people. I'm not going to list them all, but there's a lot of art and a lot of artists who worked on this, and they all did a pretty wonderful job. You'll see some of the art located throughout this video. So this is the Knightfall Saga, something I think a lot of people are familiar with. Before I even read comics, this is one of the comic book arcs that I heard about. The one where, Bane breaks Batman. But prior to this, Batman had never really been, defeated so brutally by one of his villains. And here comes Bane out of nowhere to come along and hurt Batman as much as he wanted. I've never read this entire arc before, and indeed this contains all of the comics related to the arc, including Vengeance of Bane number 1, Batman 491 to 500, Detective Comics 659 to 666. Showcase 93, 7, and 8, and then Batman Shadow of the Bat 16 through 18. So quite a bit, and this is just volume 1. I'm going to have to seek out the second volume in order to find out how this whole entire arc is concluded, and I definitely will, because I really enjoyed this particular series, this comic collection. So without further ado, let's get on to the Knightfall Saga. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So the Knightfall Saga begins with Vengeance of Bane. Bane is born into a prison system in Santa Prisca, an island nation in Latin America. Bane has been imprisoned to serve his father's life sentence because his father was a revolutionary in this dictatorial state, and his father died, and so based on the laws, Bane can serve a life sentence even though he is a small child, just a baby at this point. And so Bane is born into this prison system and molded by the darkness. Some would say that Batman merely inherited the darkness, but Bane was shaped by it, molded by it even. He comes into conflict with the warden at a very young age, and the warden puts him in solitary confinement for a significant portion of his life. And Bane, it comes to have to be hard and cruel. He shapes himself physically and mentally, becoming very intelligent and very strong. And eventually he overtakes the entire prison when he gets out of solitary confinement, and he learns about Batman and Gotham while in prison, and he sets his sights on eventually going to Gotham and perhaps taking it over. Eventually, the warden voluntarily signs him up for an experiment, the Venom Super Soldier experiment, and it is successful for him. So he does gain superpowers through chemicals that are seeped into his brain via tubes. And so Bane uses this as a means to escape from the prison and head to Gotham. And once he gets to Gotham, he gets a lay of the land, surveying the villains and Batman's methods of fighting crime. He even confronts Batman and lets him know that Batman will be begging for mercy one day, and the person who will finally defeat him, it will be Bane himself. In his effort to defeat the Bat, Bane frees all the prisoners from Arkham Asylum, including a number of the supervillains from his rogues gallery. So Batman spends the next couple months fighting and putting away again the Mad Hatter, Amygdala, Victor Zsasz, Killer Croc, Joker, and Scarecrow, as well as a host of other villains too, including the Riddler. And so, especially with Joker and Scarecrow, Scarecrow releases a fear toxin which causes him to imagine Jason Todd being killed again, because those two stories aren't far apart from one another in terms of like 5 years difference. And so Batman, like at this point in time, because he's exhausted and he can't really stop himself, he begins to beat up the Joker pretty badly. And so he does get some semblance of vengeance or revenge for what Joker did to Jason Todd, unlike with the Death in the Family storyline where Joker claimed diplomatic immunity, and Batman never really got satisfying revenge for what the Joker did in that case. And I know that's within Batman's, coda, but I still wanted some semblance of revenge for the dastardly deeds of the Joker. Anyway, as Batman continues to fight more and more villains, he becomes a little bit injured and also completely exhausted, to the point where he often can't leave the crime scenes when the police shows up. He has to hide just out of sight in order to, prevent people from finding him or arresting him, or people figuring out that he's injured at all. And it eventually reaches a point where he gets to the Batcave and he can barely climb the steps back into Wayne Manor. And when he gets there, he discovers that Alfred has been knocked out, and who should be there but Bane, who is there to harm him even more than he's already done. And so Bane's like, I've severely weakened you, I've mentally exhausted you, and now I'm here to finish the job. And they fight at that point. Bruce tries to tell him that it doesn't need to be like this, and Bane is like, no, it absolutely does. Gotham is mine now. And so Bruce tries to fight back, but Bane is clearly too powerful, and when he injects himself with the venom, there's no hope for Bruce. And eventually, you get that iconic scene where Bane breaks the bat. He breaks his back, and Batman is lying defeated on the ground, with it appearing that Bane has truly won. Bane even goes so far as to publicly humiliate Batman by throwing him into a crowd of people. Luckily, Alfred shows up and manages to whisk him away before people can figure out his identity. But Bruce is in a coma at this point, and luckily Robin is able to find a medicine that can get him out of the coma and help heal his back in the process. But Batman is in a wheelchair at this point, and he's going to need a lot of rehab before he can be back to fighting shape. And so he goes off and investigates some leads at Santa Prisca in an effort to be able to eventually defeat Bane. But because of Batman's absence, Gotham is now in chaos, which Bane has taken advantage of and has started attacking the other supervillains and some of the criminal leaders in order to consolidate his control of the city in an effort to, preserve the Batman symbol. Robin and Alfred and Bruce all agree that Azrael, John Paul Valet, I believe is his name, he should fill in as Batman. And so he's already been fighting crime as Azrael, but they ask him to step in, even though he's not proven in the field, and he's also been brainwashed in the past by a criminal organization who tried to have him kill Batman. But he claims that he's healed now, and so Azrael steps in. But Robin notes that he's, again, because he's mentally unhinged and stuff like that, he he doesn't have any problems with severely harming the criminals, and he even gets pretty close to killing some people. This particularly happens with Scarecrow when he faces Scarecrow and Anarchy, with one of Scarecrow's victims almost dying in the process, and Azrael not really caring about it. And so Robin calls him out and says that you can't be Batman unless you earn the mantle and fight as he did, and Azrael is just indifferent to the whole thing. So Bruce Wayne at this point has told Azrael, don't confront Bane. That's my responsibility. And also, Bane is dangerous, so I wouldn't ask anyone to confront him. But Azrael does, and he gets the upper hand at several points during the fight. But when Bane, injects venom, it's game over, and so Azrael has to flee. He does improve his costume in certain ways in order to basically come off as a Bat Knight of some sort. And Bane goes off and acquires more venom, and so they eventually meet head on with the police watching their fight, and it appears that Azrael is able to gain the upper hand and overcome the venom that Bane has been using, and so the story really ends with Azrael choosing not to kill Bane and letting him go to Blackgate Prison, and then Robin noting that Azrael has earned the mantle of Batman at this point. And so that's where part 1 of the entire saga ends. In terms of analysis, there is a bit to talk about with this story. One thing that I first want to note is the character of Bane. I think Bane is an amazing character, especially to be introduced at this point in Batman's history, because previously Batman was fighting, I would say, cartoonish villains. You got the Joker, who does a lot of silly and absurd things. You got the Riddler, who is more obnoxious than anything else. You got Scarecrow, who does use a fear toxin, but again, he's dressed up like a cartoon villain, and that's the case for a great deal of Batman's villains. I'd say an exception to this is probably Firefly, who sets things on fire and challenges Batman to be greater than he actually is. And so you get more of an adult turn to the Batman entire Gotham rogues gallery at this point. It is the 90s after all, and so Bane shows up, and you get this villain who isn't driven to just humiliate Batman or simply defeat him and accomplish his wacky goal like the Joker of the Riddler. He's driven completely by fear. He's driven by a desire to eradicate all fear from his life and become stronger for it. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you. "For only a few may rule the many, and you are one of a rare breed. Only one danger stands in the way of you mastering the world. What is that? Fear. The fear that lies at the heart. Only this can keep you from what is yours. Conquer the fear in your heart, and you may have anything that you desire. You will be second to no man and master of all." And so that's a hallucination that young Bane is having, sort of being confronted by his older self and telling him that the key to everything is fear and conquering that fear. Essentially, you can't be afraid of anything. Possibly that's an effect of being in prison his entire life. And if he shows fear, the other prisoners will move in and attack him or something like that and make life miserable for him. So, growing up in that setting, you'd have to conquer your fears, but it's going to have lasting effects because the prison didn't seek to reform, it only sought to make people harsher and crueler. And so a Bane that comes out of this prison system harsher, crueler, darker is going to understand that fear is eradicating fear is the key to everything. And so when he learns about Batman at this point, that's an extension of that. Oh, this creature of fear, this person who is using fear to sort of rule over Gotham, that I have to destroy them. They are a challenge to me, and so it's fascinating to see this mindset of Bane, how different he feels from other villains, and I applaud the writers for distinguishing him in that way. It's not like Scarecrow, who relies on fear, but rather Bane, who seeks to dismantle the fear that Batman represents. And I do see some similarities to Batman with Bane. Like, both grew up without parents because his mom died when he was very young, and his father was killed during the revolution that he took part in. And so they were both molded by their orphan state. But whereas Batman had a mentor like Alfred to help him get through things, Bane didn't really have that mentor. He only had his fellow prisoners who encouraged him to be more cruel or presented a challenge for him to decimate. And so you really get that feeling that, like, Bane is a victim of his surroundings. Like, he definitely has the opportunity, once he becomes like the Venom super soldier, to leave that all behind. But growing up in a prison at a young age can't be easy, and it's made Bane who he is. So a fascinating character backstory in general there. Another big theme of this story is that of running the gauntlet. I really like stories that focus on running the gauntlet. I feel like you can tell a pretty good story in that regards. I believe Spider-Man has done it before, and there are a whole bunch of other comics and movies and TV shows where characters have to run the gauntlet as they face enemy after enemy, and it leads to exhaustion and other important elements of the story that come up and force the character to confront who they are and how exactly they're going to get through this entire mess. And that's what happens with Batman. Like, he has to keep fighting, and he has to ask himself, like, should I keep fighting? Do I have to protect Gotham in this way? And he says his answer is yes. Like, he has to protect Gotham, because if he doesn't, Bane's going to take over, or some other supervillain is going to take over. What I particularly like is these villains aren't really working together. Besides Joker and Scarecrow, like, the other villains, they have their own goals in mind. So Batman is being pulled in multiple directions. Like, these villains aren't working together in a common goal to dismantle Batman. Like, they just all happen to have escaped Arkham at the same time, and they're all working to take their piece of the city. I think it's brilliant on the writers' parts. But another enemy that comes up here is exhaustion itself, because Batman has to fight the villains, super villains, but he also has to fight the feeling that he's tired and he can't keep going on, and he also has to fight himself, because when Batman is stressed, as other comics have shown at the time, he pushes away his friends. He doesn't seek help even though he clearly needs it, and he actively engages in I want to say suicidal or harmful behavior on his part. Maybe it's because he feels that only he can save Gotham, or he's a glory hound who needs to be able to do this in order to justify being Batman or something like that. But it's clear that these behaviors are only furthering the gauntlet for him, are only making things more difficult. And I like comics that explore that aspect of Batman, because he's a flawed individual, and so many comics before this tried to show him as like justified in his actions. But here, his selfish and his desire to do this by himself only furthers the point that he might not make it through this gauntlet. Another thing I like about this is that the gauntlet is targeting his resiliency, because in Under the Red Hood, the comic that I read before this, Alfred notes that one of the things that the villains fear about Batman is his resiliency, his ability to get back up even though he's been pushed down and beaten up and nearly defeated. He always gets back up. But Bane is smart, showing another difference in character here, in that he's targeting that resiliency. He's trying to make it so Batman can't get back up anymore. That he's trying to take away that symbol of how strong and resilient Batman is. So it's very smart on his part, and it's also like. It also shows where you need to attack, because you can attack Batman's friends and family, as Joker has done, but that's only going to make him angrier, and you can try to, take away the symbol of the bat. Like, you can try to showcase to the public that he's a normal man, but that's only going to, make Batman, more entrenched. He's going to try harder to further that mystique in some way. And so, I like that element of the story, too. Another element of the story is possession, specifically possessing Gotham. There are multiple characters throughout the story story who say that Gotham is theirs or that Gotham belongs to somebody else. Bane says it at the very beginning of the story when he's in prison. He's like, who does Gotham belong to? And someone answers, Batman. Like, Batman is the protector, but I don't think Bane can see the difference between protector and ownership. Because for Batman, like, yeah, sure, Gotham is his, but it's under his protection. He doesn't rule over it with an iron fist. Although that you could make an argument that he possibly does. So for Bane, like, he wants to control Gotham, and in order to do that, he has to defeat the person who already controls it, and that's Batman in his eyes. And after he does manage to defeat Batman, he claims that Gotham belongs to him. And then after Azrael fills in for Batman, he even starts to claim that Gotham belongs to Bane. But he wants to change that, which shows the greatest difference in Azrael and Bruce Wayne, in that Bruce Wayne doesn't really want to claim to Gotham. He only wants to protect it. But Azrael feels that Batman, the identity of Batman, he rules over Gotham, possibly because of his brainwashing and whatnot. He feels that the mantle of Batman is someone who is the sort of like king of Gotham. And so he particularly feels anger and vengeance towards Bane because Bane has laid claim to something that he believes is rightfully his once he has assumed the mantle of Batman. And I think that's why their fight is so brutal and violent. It's because it's a territorial dispute at its heart, with both sides believing they are the rightful owners of Gotham, that Gotham is theirs. You could probably make an argument for toxic masculinity or something like that, but I won't go into that right now. But I do like the idea that the writers are talking a little bit more about who owns Gotham and what it means to own it in general, or even be the protector of the city. And the last thing that I want to talk about, that I liked at least, is the Bane versus Azrael fight at the very end of the story. I think it's phenomenal. The best way I can describe it is how I described it to Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. It's pure, uncut, adrenaline-soaked violence, with both people believing that Gotham is theirs, and this being a big grudge fight for the two of them. Azrael was previously sort of defeated by Bane, and he can't abide that, and Bane sees Azrael as a challenger, and also very a defiant obstruction, because he's already destroyed the Bat, and because Batman, or Azrael, is pretending to be Batman, he's sort of flaunting the fact that maybe Bane didn't actually do that. And so you get this big old fight where Bane is using as much venom as possible, and Batman has completely changed his outfit. Azrael has sort of made himself a knight, and their fight is brutal and just completely violent and absolutely wonderful. It's well designed. It's well written. Kudos to the artist as well as the writers. I would love to see this fight played out on the big screen in the movies, because we haven't really gotten that from a Batman adaptation yet. Batman and Robin back in the 90s had Bane, but Bane was more of a joke in that movie. And you get Christopher Nolan's Batman in the 2000s, but the problem with that is that Batman is more, Bane is more realistic, so you don't get this venom-soaked violence that you see in this story. He goes for more of a realistic take there, and that's, you can't have that kind of fun with a realistic take. So yeah, I do hope that one day we get a true adaptation of the Knightfall saga, because I would absolutely love that. One thing that I don't like about this story is there's multiple, because it's a collection, there's multiple comic books, and some of the comic books do have a tendency to drag on and be a bit boring. I will say that the miniature Two-Face arc, the two comics that you see there, they're not my favorite stories, and I think they're pretty skippable in terms of understanding the entire arc. So not every specific comic is a winner, but the story as a whole is pretty fantastic, and so I guess you can skip a few of the specific stories in this comic and not be, or in this collection, and not be worse for your wear. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Knightfall Saga Volume 1. I hope to get to the Knightfall Saga Volume 2, and I definitely recommend this for everyone out there. If you want a pretty decent, a pretty great Batman story arc that highlights all the facets of Batman's character, you can't go wrong with the Knightfall Saga. So I'm definitely going to recommend that you go out there and find it. You can possibly get it at your local library. I had to go out and actually buy this, which, not a bad purchase in my opinion. If you read this before or you want to comment on my review below, feel free to do that. I would love to have a discussion about this fabulous story arc. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people who might not be aware of this story arc can find out about it. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and venomous travels. Farewell.